Hello there, and welcome to my new blog post. It's been quite a long time since I did this for YouTube. It's taken me quite a long time to put together a new video because I have a new and exciting project to share with you that I announced on Instagram on the 26th of April, and here it is. It's my new book, My Autistic Conservative Objectives. Finally, after 4 years of development hell, I finally got this book printed, published, and it's now available on Amazon in ebook and paperback. The book has taken me quite a lot of energy and time to get into motion. In fact, I started writing it during the lockdown of March 2020, and I worked on it between reading and researching ideas for which I could develop my autistic conservative objectives in the form of a printed book. Now, after the 2019 general election, when I helped the Conservatives win their biggest majority in many years, I then had to I then took the time out and took advantage of the COVID pandemic to evaluate and look at what my conservative ideas were and how my autism advocacy objectives were central to my conservative beliefs. That is to say, conservative as in the political ideology, and not just the party itself. So, to that end, I looked at every other book and every other autistic political activist out there, and, well, as fate would have it, I couldn't find anything directly connected to conservative ideas. Most of them were all socialists. The angry, rabid, actually autistic cult who vote Labour just to protect their welfare benefits, and also to, pretty much just constantly curse people and revel in the in self-pity. Not my style. No. A key component of my autistic conservative objectives is to promote bright ideas as broad as the spectrum of autism is, and how it can reach within that strand of the spectrum that represents conservative ideas and values, both philosophically and politically. And so that's what led to me writing this. Now, let's take a look at the content, shall we? The book covers a lot of things about how I weave my autism advocacy with conservative ideas. It's not a book about autism or about conservative ideas, but it's a book about my objectives and how I, as an autistic man, follow conservative ideas to put them into action, and how they can be achieved. Within this book, you will find a brief guide to the autistic spectrum and neurodiversity, told from my own perspective and the way I live with autism. A collection of my stories as a political party activist, working on the front line of the party with my fellow activists. I've also taken some inspiration from my friend and fellow autistic libertarian Jessica Ensley, who wrote in her own book an exercise looking at how you could examine and see your own autistic traits and how they make you unique in what you are as an individual. As they say, if you met one autistic person, then you've only met one autistic person, and you have yet to find another autistic person. And this is me, that one autistic person. a conservative autistic. But that's not to say that I represent all conservative autistics out there. There's every autistic conservative that you'll find out there has their own variation of ideas about what to do politically, both for the party and for their own nations. Within this book, I've also looked at examples of how the workspace can be adopted to suit autistic people, like accommodations that employers could take on, and how to build the work environment to accommodate the needs of certain autistic individuals. The schooling system, which is a hot topic always seen in autism, because the way it's always apparently so rigid and not willing to recognise a diversity of intelligence and abilities, something that we see quite often, because most schools here in Britain just simply expect you to find a simple test for one form of intelligence and one set of skills and abilities. But you need to adapt the schooling curriculum to make it suited to, well, one type of person and another type of person, so that they can be tailored to work for in the kind of work they're expected to fulfill in life. Then there's also the healthcare and well-being of autism. In this book, I look at how the National Health Service could be restructured and taken to adopt itself so that it can take a mixed public and private social enterprise, so that it can be free to take on and adapt itself to the needs of each person, like providing healthcare for a disabled person who needs to be, say, like in a community setting. Not sure I can elaborate on that enough. And there's also within this chapter looking at how you should be mindful about what to expect from a healthcare system that does not expect people to get well, but people to be constantly sick, and in some cases even euthanize them. During the COVID-19 pandemic, whilst I was writing this, I heard some horrible stories from healthcare centres who liberally handed out do not resuscitate orders to patients, including those with autism, should they catch COVID, so that they could die off and, be disposed of as if they were just, not worth saving, as their impairments made them more of a burden as they were a hindrance to the overwhelmed healthcare service during the pandemic, where they had to treat lots of thousands of COVID patients, and we had to keep ourselves locked in to avoid the virus from getting to us, which also meant that we were told basically to just die off as useless cretins that had nothing of any value in life. And then there's the next chapter, Advancing Science and Technology Enterprises for the Living. This chapter fuses my passion for science with my political activities. Being that I'm also a big science geek, I wanted to bring some ideas about how we could improve the quality of life as autistic people for autistic people, as we are geniuses of science and art. Now, from the way as I've written in this, now the title of this chapter, We the Living, tells the supreme value of an individual life and the evil of a state that claims the right to take and sacrifice that life. The sacrifices being that it takes away from these characters in their spirited determination to lead a good life. It holds that each individual has a moral right to live for his or her own sake, to pursue his or her own personal happiness. the title of this chapter is reflected off of the of Ayn Rand's classic book about growing up during the Bolshevik Revolution, titled "We the Living." And in essence, this what this chapter explores is how well, when we give people with great intelligence and abilities, like those with autism, the ability to excel in their scientific interests, like I do, we can build great things to make a healthy, happy country. And well, I believe, as this chapter tells, variety of innovation leads to new hope, new ideas, and new ways of living that could perhaps benefit autistic people, which then parts on to other people who are not on the spectrum. It's about celebrating the gospel of wealth and innovation. And then moving on to chapter 8, there's self-determination of autism in civic nationalism. This one looks at how embracing nationalist ideas can actually improve the life and well-being of autistic people. Examples of which I can show you and one example that I have shown is how the Jewish Zionist movement inspires my autistic conservative objectives. At the time I wrote this book, well, at the time before I sent this book to publication, the October 7th massacre happened in southern Israel when the Hamas terrorist forces savagely and barbarically attacked Israel, which in turn led to the Israel-Gaza war, and of course led to perhaps one of the greatest war crime acts of war and terrorism in the Middle East. However, I wasn't able to write anything anew in this book to add to it, but I did make a few. I have mentioned plenty of references in here to how I take inspiration from the Jewish people's practice of tikkun olam to advance disabled people. In fact, in Israel, Jewish culture includes disabled people in all aspects of life, and for that, I reckon that my fellow autistics should actively support Israel and also be good friends of the Jewish people. You cannot fault on that, and if you don't believe that that the Jewish people have a right to a state of their own, then you have no moral justification for advocate for the well-being of disabled people, because in Israel, it's one of the best places in the world for disabled people to live and thrive. I've been on 3 marches in support of Israel and for the release of the hostages, and in doing so, I've become probably the leader of the start of an autistic Zionist movement as well. So look out for that in future. Maybe when I launch, expand on this podcast and launch my own conservative media company, I will probably include a Zionist and Jewish or rather a Zionist advocacy objective as part of my broadcasting potential. Now, I'm moving on from this. I also look in a very strong chapter titled "The Neuroideological Crusade of Critical and Social Eugenics." This one may be particularly important for those of you who question if being a conservative means you support eugenics ideas, as many on the left argue that conservative parties or other sorts of right-wing activists actively dismiss and invalidate disabled people, when in actual fact I can prove through this book that disabled people are better off being conservatives because they value life and they value all classes of citizens. Herbal tea. Covered within this chapter, I take a good long hard look at the civil rights crisis that's affecting the Western world. Post October 7, we've seen a revelation to ourselves about how and why we in the West suffer from a constant social poison of racism, bigotry, homophobia, ableism. And the reason why I think we're still suffering from an inability to contain or remove ourselves from our prejudices towards one another is because the do-gooders who are actively on the lookout to fight the racism and the prejudices, such as, well, all those things that I listed, including ableism, is because rather than harmonising, getting people to get along with each other, they prefer to encourage us to weaponise our points of differences and use them to attack and vilify people not like us. And that binary perception with oppressor versus oppressed narrative is probably why we still have things like anti-Semitism and ableism. In particular, within this chapter, I also explore how I ended up becoming a Zionist and a good friend of the Jews because I could relate my struggles to what happened when I was picked on because of my Polish middle name, which in turn led to me being accused of being a Jew by my school's Muslim Bengalis, who acted like they had the supreme moral authority over the school. And also, I also contain within this chapter a subsection called Social Darwinism Inspired Marxism, where I explain in detail how I deconstructed this historical record in which the Marxist ideas of socialism and communism were in part inspired by Charles Darwin's theory Origin of Species book. In fact, I believe that the Marx took his inspiration from the scientist whose works inspired eugenics, while in fact Marx was an avid fanboy of Charles Darwin and his work on natural selection. And there's lots of interesting stuff that covers in here that will certainly put to rights why disabled people should avoid socialism because it encourages eugenics and hatred towards people who are different to each other. Not by that, however, but instead of using the Darwinian narrative of the survival of the fittest, they use the survival of those who perpetuate the strongest grievances, and in doing so use that to eat up and destroy, weaponize themselves against the other group. And I did this by reading Darwin's theory on the origin of species and deconstructing it to look at where Marx might have chosen. That paragraph is similar to what Marxism teaches in eliminating the class barriers and overthrowing and killing people to make sure that the proletariat are the dominant species in the in a human in a animal kingdom themed human civilization. And then, of course, we move on to a more positive chapter again, this time looking at the inventive and creative and inventive characteristics of autism. Hans Asperger famously said, "It seems for success in science or art, a dash of autism is essential." And that runs true through the stories of 4 autistic people through history who I use as examples in the book. I've used 2 scientists and 2 artists. Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, the poet Emily Dickinson, and the painter J.M.W. Turner. And then moving on to the next chapter, how conservative beliefs work for neurodiversity. Here I contain a few stories about how the concept of freedom and self-determination is a strong conservative value that that I adhere to, because with those kinds of conservative values, I can build the means of achieving what my intellectual abilities can give me to make something that would be of useful to human civilization. Celebrating, and in the in accordance with this, I believe that autistics are strong and brave when they support liberty and freedom as conservatives. Contained within this chapter, I talk about a few conservative principles that are relevant to autism, like a celebration of variety of people, the principle of imperfectibility, being that we're imperfectly made as we have a disability. Conservatives embrace imperfectibility, both as in human nature, whereas socialists just seek to remove that imperfectibility by means of because according to them, they see that anything that's imperfect or not wanted in their society should be systematically eliminated to make a clean and imperfect world, which is absolutely revolting, because it just makes people with certain types of weaknesses or differences seem well, as biological garbage that should not be seen or heard. The public-spirited and yes, public-spirited community, where we conservatives are not selfish in nature. They are public-spirited in nature, and they understand the need for true community. British conservatives, such as myself, are strongly attached to their national pride, always upholding voluntary community instead of state collectivism. And of course, one of those famous examples that I took from in writing this book is how a conservative, or rather a libertarian idea of an approach to money and business means that we can create wealth that makes this country rich, strong, and powerful for ourselves. The great 18th century philosopher Adam Smith wrote the book The Wealth of Nations in 1776. Within that book, he explained that real wealth is not achieved by the accumulation of gold or vast profits of wealth from collectivism, but by liberating people's gifts. So if, for example, Elon Musk, who's a great tech genius, who's also on the autistic spectrum, he has liberated a number of gifts by being a serial entrepreneur. He's used his gift and love of cars to make the electric vehicle market go further than what the current market allowed for, by upgrading the batteries so that they were capable of being recharged to the same capacity as a mobile phone or laptop battery. He's advanced space technology by choosing not to follow trends of rocket designs which are, well, disposable and have got outdated means of propulsion, and instead made them reusable and using methane and liquid oxygen as opposed to hydrogen liquid oxygen. Come to think of it, I'd very much like to ride on top of one of Elon Musk's Falcon 9 or Starship rockets in the future. I've also got aspirations to be an astronaut. And thanks to Elon Musk's cleverness, he's also brought down the cost of space travel as well. In 2002, when he launched SpaceX, the average cost of a space launch to low Earth orbit was about $20,000 per kilo. Thanks to the Falcon 9 rocket, it now costs $2,000 per kilo. Well, that's the book itself. I hope you found the subject of the contents really interesting. And well, I think its purpose to you as the reader is that it will show you well, what one autistic person is capable of achieving, and how your autistic self can perhaps achieve great things with your own objectives. Although it's not necessarily for conservatives only, you can read it whatever side of the political spectrum you are on. In fact, as an autistic person whose advocacy idea revolves around a broad spectrum of ideas and abilities, I don't just take conservatism as the only ideology to follow. I also embrace other forms of the people from whose other creative talents come from the other sides of the political spectrum. Right, okay, that's all I have for this video. If you want to hear more about future updates that I have coming this way after you've probably read this book, which I hope you do, it's available on Amazon. Paperback £12.99, £12.99. The ebook is £9.99. You can subscribe to my channel to learn more about how autism and conservatism are fused together, my passion for science, my commentaries on things that are about to come, and well, my special interests, my commentary on my special interests, and hopefully I'll see you again next time. Subscribe to the channel to find out more about me. I'm a very curious creature, and you never know what you might find.